Greetings, dear listeners. I am Bella, a wanderer of the night and a collector of the darkest tales. This is BellaDarkTales, where I share stories that will haunt your dreams. Let's start with our first story. This story I got from a Reddit group. It is posted by an unknown named girl. So, let's read in words of her own. Have you ever followed a rule without knowing why? A rule that seemed pointless at first, but carried an unspoken weight, a silent warning that made the back of your neck prickle? Some rules are there to protect you. Others exist to protect something else from getting out. I learned that the hard way. My time as a park ranger wasn't what I expected. It wasn't about guiding lost hikers, protecting wildlife, or enjoying peaceful nights under the stars. It was about survival, about obeying rules that felt less like guidelines and more like whispered prayers. At Black Hollow National Park, the rules weren't there to keep us safe. They were there to keep something else in. I never planned to end up at Black Hollow. It wasn't on my list of places to apply. I hadn't even heard of it before. But after months of job hunting, after sending out resume after resume and receiving nothing but polite rejections or silence, my phone rang. "We reviewed your application," a man's voice said, flat and to the point. "We'd like you to start immediately. No interview, no questions, no follow-ups, just a job offer, dropped into my lap like I had been chosen for something without knowing why. It didn't sit right, but I couldn't afford to be picky. My savings were drying up, and rent was due. So I packed my bags, filled up my car, and drove into the mountains, toward a place that seemed to exist outside of time. The deeper I went, the more the world seemed to shift. The roads narrowed. The trees grew taller, denser, pressing in from both sides as if they were watching. By the time I reached the ranger station, I felt like I had crossed some invisible threshold, like I had left behind the world I knew. The station itself was small, an old wooden building nestled between towering pines. It looked like it had been standing there for decades, untouched by modern hands. My new supervisor, Ranger Dalton, was waiting for me outside. Dalton was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. He didn't waste time with small talk. A firm handshake, a gruff nod, and he led me inside. The first part of our meeting was exactly what I expected: rules about campers, wildlife safety, emergency protocols. I listened, nodded, and took notes. Then, just as I thought we were done, he pulled out a single folded piece of paper and slid it across the desk. "These are the park's special rules," he said, his voice low. I hesitated before unfolding it. The paper felt worn, creased from being handled too many times. The list inside wasn't long, but every rule sent a chill down my spine. Do not enter the forest between 2:13 a.m. and 3:33 a.m. If you are inside during this time, leave immediately. If you see a woman in white standing at the tree line, do not approach. Do not speak to her. Do not let her see you blink. Ignore any voices calling your name from the trees. No one should be out there after dark. If you hear whistling between midnight and dawn, go inside. Lock the doors. Wait until it stops. If a man in a park ranger uniform asks you for help past sunset, do not follow him. He is not one of us. Do not look directly at the fire watchtower after midnight. If you see lights on, close your eyes and count to 10 before looking away. If you find a deer standing completely still, staring at you, do not break eye contact. Back away slowly. Do not turn your back on it. Their reach ends with the sunrise. I looked up, expecting a smirk, some indication that this was just an elaborate joke for the new guy. But Dalton's face was unreadable, his expression carved from stone. "This is some kind of initiation, right?" I asked, forcing a laugh. Trying to scare the rookie? He didn't blink. "Follow them, or you won't last long here." Something in his tone, low, unwavering, dead serious, sent a cold shiver down my spine. I wanted to push back, to ask what he meant, but the weight of his gaze made me swallow my words. I told myself it was just a weird tradition, some local superstition meant to freak out newcomers. But still, I followed the rules, just in case. For the first few nights, nothing happened. The air was still, the forest eerily quiet, and I started to believe maybe it was all nonsense. Maybe Dalton and the others were just messing with me. Then everything changed. It was my 5th night on the job. I was in the ranger station, finishing up paperwork, when I heard it. A whistle. Low and slow, a tuneless melody drifting through the open window. My entire body went rigid. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Wind through the trees, maybe a bird, but deep down I knew. Rule number 4. If you hear whistling between midnight and dawn, go inside. Lock the doors. Wait until it stops. Heart pounding, I reached for the window and slammed it shut. My hands trembled as I locked the door and turned off the lights. The whistling didn't stop. It circled the station, moving closer, then farther away, weaving through the trees like something searching, like something calling. I held my breath. Seconds stretched into minutes. My ears strained in the darkness, every muscle in my body locked in place. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I didn't sleep after that. And I knew, without a doubt, that Black Hollow's rules weren't just superstition. They were warnings. And something out there was waiting for me to break them. 2 nights later, my shift was almost over when I found myself near the eastern tree line. The air was thick with silence, the kind that made every footstep sound too loud. Every breath felt like it disturbed something unseen. My flashlight cut through the dark, sweeping over the towering pines and the dense undergrowth. Then I saw it. Something pale, barely visible between the trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. Maybe the moon reflecting off a patch of fog or the smooth bark of a birch tree. But as I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't a trick. A woman stood there. She wore a long white dress, the fabric draping loosely around her body, unmoving despite the faint breeze whispering through the branches. Her posture was unnaturally stiff, rigid, as if she had been standing there for hours. Watching me, a slow, crawling dread slithered up my spine. I raised my flashlight, my fingers tightening around it. The beam cut through the dark and landed on her face. My stomach plummeted. She had no eyes, just 2 hollow sockets, dark, endless voids that swallowed the light, reflecting nothing back. Every instinct screamed at me to run. My legs locked in place, my breathing turned shallow. Then, through the rising panic, a thought clawed its way to the front of my mind. Rule number 2. If you see a woman in white, do not approach. Do not speak to her. Do not let her see you blink. I forced myself to stay still. My vision blurred as my eyes burned, my lungs tightening with the desperate need to blink. It felt unnatural, unbearable, like my body was rebelling against me. Then she moved. Her head tilted, slow and deliberate, as if she was listening for something. A soft, almost curious motion. I felt like an animal caught in a predator's gaze. Then, just as silently, she stepped back. Another step, and then, as if the darkness itself swallowed her whole, she was gone. The second she disappeared, my body gave in. My eyes slammed shut, burning tears spilling down my face as I sucked in a shuddering breath. But I was still standing. I was alive. I fumbled for my radio with shaking hands, pressing the button with more force than necessary. Dalton, I rasped, my voice barely above a whisper. I saw her. A long pause. Then his voice crackled through. You didn't blink, right? His tone was sharp, urgent. No. Good. A breath. Go back inside. I didn't argue. I couldn't. A week passed, but the fear never left me. Every night, I patrolled with a careful, measured silence, my mind constantly circling back to her. To those empty sockets. To the way she moved, like something that wasn't supposed to exist in this world. I followed the rules religiously. Every single one. But that didn't mean I felt safe. It was close to midnight when I finished my last patrol of the evening. The path leading back to the ranger station was empty, the trees looming on either side, their branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The only sound was the crunch of my boots against the dirt trail. Suddenly, I saw a figure, standing near the trailhead, dressed in the familiar olive green uniform of a park ranger. He wasn't moving, just standing there, waiting. I slowed my steps. Something was off. Even in the dim light, I could tell I didn't recognize him. And I knew every ranger assigned to Black Hollow. He raised a hand and waved. "Hey, can you help me with some things?" His voice was smooth. Too smooth. I stopped in my tracks. My mind raced, searching for an explanation. Maybe a ranger from another district? Maybe someone new? But then, deep in my gut, I felt it wrong. Something about his tone, his posture, the way he stood too still, sent every instinct screaming. Then the words surfaced in my mind. Rule number 5. If a man in a park ranger uniform asks for help past sunset, do not follow him. My mouth went dry. My pulse pounded in my ears. "What do you need?" I asked carefully, my voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. It stretched across his face in a way that didn't seem natural, the skin pulling too tightly over his cheekbones. His lips curled upward, but his eyes, empty and unblinking, held nothing behind them. "Just come with me," he said, his voice too calm, too empty. I stepped back. He stepped forward. Then his face shifted, not like an expression changing. "No." His skin moved, like something underneath was trying to adjust, trying to fit itself into human form. My stomach twisted. I turned and ran. The station was less than 100 yards away, but it felt like miles. My boots pounded against the dirt, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I didn't dare look back. I reached the door and practically threw myself inside, slamming it shut, twisting the lock with trembling fingers. My body was shaking so violently, I could barely breathe. Then, my radio crackled. Dalton's voice. "Did he talk to you?" I swallowed, forcing my breath to steady. "Yes," I whispered. A long pause. "Did you follow him?" "No." Silence. Then, finally, Dalton spoke again. "Good." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, quietly, he said, "Get some rest." But how could I? Because now I knew there was more than one thing in Black Hollow, and some of them wore our faces. By now, I followed every rule like my life depended on it because I was starting to believe it did. I had now memorized the paper that held the rules by heart because breaking even one of them could cost me my life. One night, I was hiking a remote trail, far from the main paths, where the trees pressed in close, and the only sound was my own footsteps crunching against fallen leaves. The air was cold, still, untouched by the usual sounds of the forest. No birds, no insects, just silence. Then, ahead of me on the trail, I saw a massive buck. Its antlers stretched wide, jagged like twisted branches. Its body was eerily still, its legs locked in place, as if it had been frozen mid-step. It didn't move, didn't flick its ears, didn't even breathe. It just stared. A deep, unsettling feeling crawled over my skin. Then, like a reflex, my mind pulled up another rule. Rule number 7. If you find a deer standing completely still, staring at you, do not break eye contact. Back away slowly. Do not turn your back. A pulse of fear shot through me. I forced my muscles to stay still, to resist the instinct to run. Carefully, I took a slow step backward. The deer's mouth opened. A sound came out. Not a grunt. Not the sharp, startled cry deer sometimes make. A voice. A garbled, broken whisper. "You shouldn't be here." My body seized with terror. The words were wrong. Warped, stretched, almost human but not quite. The sound slithered into my ears like something that didn't belong in this world. I couldn't help it. I turned and ran. Footsteps, no. Hooves pounded against the dirt behind me. I didn't dare look back. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop until I saw the ranger station in the distance. Only then did I allow myself to glance over my shoulder. The trail was empty. The sun was up, but the silence still clung to the air, suffocating and heavy. I never used that trail again. 3 months later, I quit. I didn't need any more signs. I didn't need to understand. I just knew I had to leave. Dalton didn't try to stop me. He didn't ask why. He just nodded, his expression unreadable. Not everyone can handle it. As I packed up my things, a question gnawed at me, something I had avoided asking since the first night. But now, on the verge of leaving, I couldn't hold it in. The rules, I hesitated, gripping the strap of my backpack. They're not to protect us from the park, are they? Dalton let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his face. No, he said finally, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. They're to protect the park from us. A shiver ran down my spine. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. I just got in my car, drove out of Black Hollow, and never looked back. And no matter where I go, no matter how much time has passed, I never, ever break a rule again. Next story is also from the Reddit group, posted by user_r with no name mentioned. So, let's start with their own words. It started with a loud, shrill tone, the kind that instantly throws your body into panic mode. My phone vibrated so violently that it tumbled off the nightstand and clattered onto the wooden floor. The sound sliced through the silence of my darkened room, yanking me out of sleep so fast that my heart felt like it was slamming against my ribs. My ears were ringing, my breath was uneven, and for a split second, I thought I was dreaming. But the glow of my phone screen, stark against the darkness, told me this was real. I knew that sound. It was the emergency alert system, the one usually reserved for extreme weather warnings, Amber Alerts, or national security threats. My mind raced through the possibilities. An earthquake, a storm, something urgent. But as I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers, my groggy brain struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. Emergency alert. Do not sleep. This is not a test. Do not fall asleep under any circumstances. Stay awake until further notice. The bold red letters glared at me, the message burning itself into my brain. My first reaction was confusion. Do not sleep? What kind of alert was this? My mind scrambled for an explanation, a prank, a system glitch, maybe even some bizarre government drill. My vision was still blurry from being yanked out of sleep, but I forced myself to focus on the time at the top of my screen. 2:43 a.m. Before I could even process the first message, another alert flashed across my screen, the same piercing sound making my whole body jolt. Repeat. Do not sleep. They are present. A cold shiver crawled down my spine, slow and suffocating. They are present? The words made my stomach twist with unease. Who were they? I sat up straighter in bed, my pulse thundering in my ears. My apartment was still, wrapped in that eerie, suffocating silence that only exists in the dead of night. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I quickly checked my phone for more details, news updates, emergency broadcasts, anything that could explain what was happening. But there was nothing. No reports. No social media posts. Just that warning. I wanted to believe this was some elaborate hoax, but something about it felt wrong. It wasn't just the message itself. It was the way my body reacted to it, like an unspoken instinct was telling me to listen. Then I heard it. A sound. Faint at first, but undeniable. A wet, dragging noise. It came from outside my bedroom door. I froze mid-breath, my entire body locking up. It was slow, deliberate, unnatural. Like something heavy being pulled across the floor, but with a sickening, sticky quality that made my skin crawl. My apartment wasn't big. I lived alone in a small one-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor. There shouldn't have been anyone else inside. For a moment, I considered calling out, asking if someone was there. But something inside me screamed not to. My body tensed, my heart hammering so loud I swore whoever, or whatever, was outside could hear it. I reached for my bedside lamp out of habit, but my fingers hesitated over the switch. If someone or something had broken in, turning on the light might alert them that I was awake. My throat was dry as I slowly pulled my hand back and instead reached for my phone, gripping it like a lifeline. I slid out of bed, careful to keep my movements slow, controlled. My bare feet barely made a sound against the floor as I crept toward the door. The dragging noise had stopped. I strained my ears, waiting, listening. Nothing. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Maybe it was the pipes, or the neighbors upstairs moving furniture. Maybe I was still groggy and my brain was playing tricks on me. I exhaled, trying to calm myself. Then my phone vibrated again. Another alert. If you hear them, do not open your door. Do not let them know you are awake. My entire body went cold. The word burned into my mind, twisting into something far more terrifying than just a vague warning. My stomach lurched, my hands trembling as I took a step back from the door. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know who or what they were. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't about to test the warning. Moving as quietly as I could, I locked my bedroom door and shoved a chair under the handle. My breaths came in short, ragged bursts as I backed up, my legs finally giving out as I sank onto the bed. My heart was slamming against my ribs, my body rigid with fear. One thing was certain. I wasn't going to sleep now, even if I wanted to. A soft knock broke the silence. It wasn't loud or hurried, just a gentle, deliberate tap against the wall. But even that small sound sent a spike of panic through me. My entire body tensed, my fingers tightening around my phone. My front door remained closed, untouched. That wasn't where the knock had come from. No. It had come from the wall. My neighbor's apartment was right next to mine, separated only by a thin layer of drywall and insulation. The knock had come from his side. The realization made my skin prickle with unease. It wasn't some random noise from the building settling or pipe shifting. It was intentional. Someone was trying to get my attention. I didn't answer. For a moment, silence stretched between us. My mind raced, torn between dread and curiosity. Then, finally, I heard his voice, muffled through the wall, but unmistakably human. "Hey," he said, his tone hushed but urgent. "You awake?" My throat was dry. I hesitated, my pulse hammering, before forcing out a whisper. "Yeah." "Did you get the alert?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah." A pause. Then, quieter now, almost as if he was afraid someone or something might overhear. "You know what's going on?" "No clue," I admitted. My voice was barely more than a breath. Another pause. Then, with an edge of fear creeping into his tone, he said, "But I think there's something in my apartment." A chill swept over me, deep and immediate, like someone had emptied a bucket of ice water over my head. My fingers curled so tightly around my phone that my knuckles ached. "What do you mean?" I whispered. "I heard something," he said. "In my living room." His breathing was uneven, shallow, like footsteps, but not normal. I felt my stomach tighten. Not normal how? There was a long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was almost too soft to hear. Dragging. Slow. So guys, it was my first video. I hope you will like it. If you want to share your stories with me, share on the email mentioned in description. I will share here with the world. Like if like today's stories. Need your support to grow. Subscribe the channel and press the bell icon to get notification for new stories. Until next time, remember the night is always watching. This is Bella, signing off.